Welcome back to our Building Thinking Classrooms in Math conversation. In part 2, we delve deeper into routines, relationships, and the ripple effects of engaging students in thinking about what they are learning. We explore what happens when students lead the learning, share math tasks with their families at SLCs, and thoughtfully begin self-assessing using ski-themed levels like green circles and black diamonds. You'll hear how Raquel and Carina built communities where students feel safe to take risks, ask questions, and support each other, whether they're solving problems or guiding their parents through a thinking task at student-led conferences. From morning math talks to mild, medium, and spicy level tasks, this episode showcases how even the youngest learners surprise us with their insight, creativity, and depth of understanding. As both Carina and Raquel mentioned during the podcast, they surprise me all the time. I wouldn't come up with some of the ideas that they did. Tune in to discover how routines, reflection, and relationships are reshaping what math looks like and feels like in classrooms around the NESD. Let's join the conversation. Welcome to Northeast Voices, a podcast that spotlights the innovators and change makers in education. We're here to share the stories of inclusion, empowerment, and the impactful connections with the Northeast School Division and beyond, focusing on the pivotal role of students, families, and teachers. Join us as we dive into the conversations revealing the strategies and moments shaping the future of education. Any Voices is your platform for inspiration and connection, and is recorded in the Northeast School Division, sharing the land of Treaties 4, 5, 6, and homeland of the Métis in Northeast Saskatchewan. Be sure to subscribe and join our community of innovators and change makers. Let's get started. Both of you went back and you talked about the routine. Like, you have to start. You just have to kind of pick a place and start. Were there any, like, for people who are kind of new, and I know this year we're offering more Thinking Classroom PD, so people can kind of go in and get started. There is the Thinking Classroom book. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it here, but I think there's this one. Was there a different one that you used as a reference? Is there an elementary? I think this
There
is K to
is.
12.
Yeah. There's a K
and
to
I-
5 version that has a green cover
Yeah, okay.
as well.
So those are books that you can use as a reference, but you both went back to, we just didn't jump in all the way in. And we know Kyle said you can't jump in and expect to do all the steps all at once. You have to learn all of those processes. And even as adults, Kyle scaffolded us in deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden we forgot how much time had passed and how long we've been working on, I think it was, we were trying to interpret different symbols from some of the northern communities. And maybe it was in Alaska where they had come up with Kaktovik numerals. And I remember getting really deep into that one, trying to figure those out. But what are some of the routines that you've mentioned? You talked about the morning meeting, you talked about building that community. Are there any kind of that stand out as those were really important before you kind of jump into the other pieces?
I know last year when we had just started exploring, I began with the number talks. That was a huge part of my kind of transition, and it would just be every morning for 10-15 minutes, and it was just a gradual thing, and the students responded really well to that, and then we would start building it up a little bit more. But I probably experimented with that for a couple months and until I felt comfortable, and then explored math up a little bit more. They have lots of great resources on their website as well, and just the different features and number talks on there and or wonder tasks as well were helpful. So that was kind of my initial experimentation part, and 10-15 minutes every day didn't seem too daunting to me.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, kind of approached it in this same way last year, or yeah, I guess that was last year, just at near the end of the year, I started experimenting with a few of the math talks and which one doesn't belong or how many or just different. There's a wide variety that you can use. And this year I set it up as part of my morning routine. So it's just part of our, we have a 20-minute period where we are catching up on each other's lives and sharing a little bit and talking about what's coming ahead. And then we would spend some time with that. And I think too, doing it that way allowed me to experiment a little bit, even with how the students would respond. initially starting out, for a month I did which one doesn't belong question every day. And we would stand around the screen together, and I had a pointer, and they would go up and they would point and they would explain which one doesn't belong, and then they'd pass it off to someone else. And so we were always moving and always talking. Um, which was good. And it just became a very familiar routine for them. And kids that maybe weren't comfortable to start with, even the language, if one student pointed something out one day, the next day I would hear someone else phrase a similar statement that they or attribute that they had noticed. And I think from there too, it just gave me, then I would switch it up and say, okay, you're going to talk in your table groups, or if it was a picture, and say how many, come up with as many different how many questions as you can for this one picture. And we started out we just experimented in so many different ways. We came up with them together, or they had to come up with one on their own on their whiteboard, and then go find someone else in the room who asked a different question, and then talk about your question and show them how you answered it, and things like that. And then that eventually morphed into, as we got into some of the banner tasks, and as we got into talking about check your understanding questions, and that one of the pieces that Kyle talked about, having questions at different levels, if you're doing the spicy, medium, mild. In my classroom, we're a ski family, so we did the green circles and blue squares and black diamonds for the different levels. And then we actually ended up having, so if I put a slide up, the students were challenged to come up with their own questions. Sometimes I'd say, I want you to come up with a green level question, or I want you to see if you can come up with a blue level, and then talking about why they're different. Why is that a green question? Why is that a blue? And it allows for differentiation right there. And so I think it became a more comfortable place for myself facilitating, but also for the students, because as we did bigger thinking classroom tasks and integrating that into a math lesson, a specific math lesson, or even in science, they already had that language and they already could recognize. They'd come and tell me, well, I have an idea that's more of a blue square. And they would come up with that.
That's
And so,
awesome. I like that.
and we had in there too, I mean, they came up with I guess the criteria, what makes a green circle, what makes a blue square, and so on. And we also talked about how, depending, my blue square might be a little different than your blue square. And lots of opportunity for those types of conversations about, how each of us learn, and then identifying that the ski patrol, right? Who is the ski patrol? Well, all of your teammates and your teacher
Yes.
were all part of the ski patrol. So ask people. And I think that's a shift too, because we've always sort of approached things where I'm going to teach you and show you, and then I want you to do it, and don't talk to your neighbors about it. Just answer it on your own. I want to see what you know. But it's a change in thinking in that regard, to get them to, I want you to ask. I want, if you're stuck, find a teammate on that ski patrol and see if they can help you sort it out, and giving them that permission, and just seeing how their learning grows as a result.
When they're so proud to help each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the ultimate goal. We want students that you just talked about how they were self-assessing. This is more of a blue circle. I'm not a skier. So, but with mild, medium, spicy, the fact that they're self-assessing the idea that they have and bringing that forward to you, and that you're talking about, is that more of a green, or is that a blue, or is that like a black diamond, and I like the idea of the ski patrol. Like, we're all here to help each other, and we're a team, but not just the team that's at this task here. We're actually all on the same team, because in life, when you join a job, you work with colleagues. The colleagues are there to support each other. And one of the biggest things is, can I self-assess and know whether I get it or I don't get it? And if I don't, do I have a colleague I could ask to help me out? Is there a way that I could help to clarify that? So as students are going through and they're maybe struggling with something, and you spot that, because you would, like Raquel and both of you mentioned, you're kind of in that center of the room scanning, and you're stopping in, and you're trying not to say very much, right? You're just pausing, letting them ask a question, or you're maybe leaving, or you ask a question and then you leave, or you connect them to another group. because they're young, grades 2, 3, and 4, people are probably wondering, so what if I am really struggling with that and I'm in that group and my group members might try to help me, but what if I'm still struggling? So what does that look like for students?
I think I found the most frustrating part when we were doing our professional development with Kyle is that he would not tell us which part was wrong or kind of what we needed to do next. And as an adult, I found it so frustrating. And when I introduced it to my students, it was very similar too. They're like, well, can you just please tell us? And so, like, just that guiding and like you're still constantly checking in with them and making sure that they're on the right track and guiding them, but you're just not telling them exactly what they want to hear sometimes. And I think that's maybe where that the problem solving skills develop and that collaboration, like they have to work together. And you are definitely there if they need the support. And you're always like checking in and just watching to see who needs help. And I think they just start building that community and they have to help each other out. So I don't know if you answered your question at all, but
No, I think it does. And I like that you mentioned that, yeah, because it was frustrating for us. We'd have a question and then he'd say yes, and then he'd walk away. And we'd be like, what was the answer to that? Because we're
which
very answer
part was
driven. I wanted,
wrong or
yeah, yeah, something on your page is wrong.
yeah.
Okay, well, I know because it doesn't match somebody, but it's that I like that it's digging in and sitting in some of that discomfort, because that's where the
And that's
growth
okay.
happens, right? We have to get out of what's familiar to us and try different things in order to grow and get better. Carina, anything to add to that if you notice that somebody's struggling, or is there, and maybe if Raquel's covered kind of how that happens in the thinking classroom, there is a time and a space in thinking classrooms after you've finished kind of at the white book or the vertical surface that you do go back and work independently, because that might be a question that somebody has is, well, how do you know that I could really do it if I'm always in a group with the two of you or with other people? How do we ensure that all students are growing?
Yeah. Well, as teachers, you can move around the room and there's growth in that. There's learning to happen, as the facilitator for that too, because there were certainly days when we started out where I thought, oh boy, I definitely did not get around to everybody's spot. And there's, some of them that would finish and they'd be looking for somebody else, a new question or how to move forward. And you grow and become more comfortable juggling and managing that as the teacher. But I think too, I was very much felt that frustration when we participated as with Kyle in those PD sessions. I think too, what really helped was not approaching it as in, well, something's not right here, or underlining it and saying, no, I don't think so. I tried to remind myself to point out, not to spend my time pointing out what should be changed or that idea of correcting them, but just asking them a question. I wonder what would happen if, or I'm not understanding. Can you explain it to me? And a lot of them, as they show me, well, this is what I was thinking, and I think you need to do this instead. And I added these together. And if I recognize that there had been something missed there, then they get to that point in their explanation and they often catch it themselves, right? And so it's that, just a question. It's just asking, I wonder if what would happen if we looked at it this way, or if I was going to look for a multiplication problem there instead of addition, what would that look like? And I think just changing the way we approach it with them. But it is a process, and they need to feel comfortable to make the mistakes and to help each other. And one of the pieces too was I often would say, well, if you're stuck and I haven't gotten there yet, wander over and look at somebody else's. Like, wander over to another group and take a look at what they've got going on. Maybe there's something there that will spark an idea for you and your partner and things like that. So again, giving them that freedom to rely on each other for some of the information. Yeah.
I think you phrased it interestingly, a freedom to rely on each other, because somehow we think that we need to do it all ourselves in learning, and I should just be able to see it once and know how to do it. And that's not really how we learn to do things in life. We learn by actually practicing hands-on, having conversations, figuring out what doesn't work. And I think that goes back to that idea of that community that you create, that it's safe to make mistakes. that we collaborate together and asking questions, which is sometimes a
Right.
challenge for us as teachers because
Yeah.
we're really good at fixing things. That's what we're designed to see where it's not working and then tell them how to fix it. But telling people how to do it doesn't really help anybody learn how to do that or remember how to do that in the future. So you worked with your students are pretty young compared to when we talked with Dan Milkey working with kids that are in middle years or into high school. And so I know you talked about rich vocabulary and the conversations and they were making connections. So for people that are wondering how deep can kids in grade 2, 3, and 4 go in math, what did you see them digging into or what surprised you most maybe in that area?
That's a hard one. I feel like they surprise me all the time. Like we would do some number talks and I honestly wouldn't come up with some of the ideas that they did. Like they taught me so much as well. And I would just be so surprised at some of the things that they would say. And those connections to other things that we were learning about or had, in 2 units before, they would go back to that. And just some of the connections that they made all on their own really surprised me.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I think, and as I look into the fall and having a straight 3 and just even knowing some of the students that I have coming to me and how different these little learners are from this year to next and sort of just the group that they are, I had a lot of students this year, very independent, high level thinking, particularly in math. And I mean, it was contagious and it was a gift to me, really. That's the crew I had to work with this year because they just ate it up and they were excited to be challenged and to also help others in the room that might not see it. But I think we talk about building the community with each other and that safe place for them to be vulnerable and explore their understanding. And I think there were certainly kids in different moments that would come up with something or see something in a how many slide or a which one doesn't belong, for example, and point things out where I would have to really well, you better come up and walk us all through that because, Mrs. Calow's not seeing it. So you really, and I mean, and I wasn't pretending either. There were some of them where I thought, oh boy, there was also students that they'd have their hand up and want to come and they were going to point out something that doesn't belong. And a couple of them thinking, I was just never sure where they were going to go, right? Like sometimes this could be really out of left field, but so neat that even in June, I had kids a lot this week popping up with something they've noticed in a which one doesn't belong slide. And I'm going, whoa, okay. Like I didn't expect that at all. I didn't see that. And I didn't expect that from that particular student specifically either. And their teammates going, oh yeah, that's a really neat one and things like that. So I think, and when we talk a little bit about the frustration that you feel when we're not giving them the information or we're not telling them the exact steps to follow, I think often it is those higher level thinkers or those students that maybe math typically is something they sail through and are ready for the next piece. And what I was really encouraged to see this year is how these thinking tasks and just the way that you facilitate the learning using some of these strategies, it allows those kids to feel challenged, but there's also a challenge for them in needing to stop and slow down and find ways to help and support their teammate in a thinking task, for example. It isn't just enough for you to know how to answer it. How could you explain that so that you could bring along your teammate? And there's a lot of learning, not just in math, but just as growing little minds. There's a lot of learning to have happen in the ability to interact with other people that way. So I think that's just another level to it that has been interesting and really neat to see happen this year.
I think for those higher level students too, just having them stop and think about how they got there and to explain that is extremely important because they often know what the answer is, but they don't know how they got there and what the process was. So,
Yeah.
I think about how math has shifted since I went to school back in the last century for math, or last millennium maybe, where we would just, this is what the teacher said, so we did that, and this is what the answer was. And then I had the opportunity to work as a learning consultant and be in different classrooms and be in some of your classrooms, and I would think, wow, right? Like that's why that works this way. And how instead of just telling kids how it works this way, they're actually making those connections and thinking through it and coming up with it. And I think how powerful is it when, as a student, you're working in a team or yourself and you make that connection? That's like talk about the brain chemistry related to that, right? Feel good hormones that are neurotransmitters that are being released that help you to connect more deeply to that learning, the fact that you're sharing it with others. And you've mentioned how it challenges it. It encourages strong learners to dig in deeper, to pause, to think about different ways that they can learn and what they did and how they can help others. But I have heard from many teachers, and I think all of you have mentioned it, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a math person to be able to come up with what did I notice in that problem.
No.
Everybody at a different point
Yeah.
in time
Yeah.
shows their strengths because everybody learns in different ways and everybody comes with different experiences. And so it really gives that community the chance to grow, and they can really start to see the strengths and help each other out.
Yeah.
So I think what you're hitting on quite a few things there. You're talking about student engagement. You're also talking about student agency because they're really starting to own that and see how they can make a difference in their learning. If you were to think about math class before, and there's always, we're not saying that learning certainly doesn't happen in math classes that aren't using Thinking Classroom. Lots of learning happens in all sorts of classes. But if you were to think about student engagement and that idea of agency and owning the learning, what would you say kind of the before to the now in June, previous years to how math looks now? How would that impact engagement or agency?
I actually had a parent that at student-led conferences asked me if this is going to be the direction that we're moving. And I said, well, I really hope so. Just that building thinking classrooms, the students are collaborating, the student ownership, because she said her child comes home and talks about math and she loves to hear what he is sharing. Maybe not every day, but he'll come home and say like, oh, did you know this? And this is what we were working on. And I think that for families, it has been extremely exciting to hear the connection between what we're doing at school and at home and that student engagement. And they are excited. And it's not just, I think the shift has been like, it's not just sitting and learning math facts, but it's developing those skills to understand like why 3 times 3 is 9. And you're building off all of the skills that they have learned in previous grades, and you're just continuing that progression. And I think just the connection with everything is really nice to see. And it's exciting.
Well, and powerful when a parent
Mhm.
comes in and says, we just had a conversation about math. I know my daughter's taking financial literacy currently, so we're having all sorts of interesting conversations because they've started at school. So it's nice to come home and to have more of those conversations. It's engaging not only the student, but the family in that process as well. And Carina, first, I think we'll turn it over to you for the engagement and agency, but I think both of you maybe have done some work at SLCs, sharing kind of with parents about thinking classrooms. So more engagement, less engagement. What do you see, Carina?
Different, I guess, would be how I would say. Yeah, our last SLC, our celebration of learning, I guess we called it. Our school had set it up to be more centers based. So have some different stations and have people moving throughout the room, trying different things. And so we decided as a class, I said, well, we're going to do one of these thinking tasks with your families at SLCs. And I said, so normally I have these cards that I use to hand out, and that's how they randomly end up in a group for a thinking task. And I said, we're going to skip over that part. But I said, the boards will be set up on the lockers, and they helped me choose some images that would be suitable for a how many question. And at that time, we were looking at repeated addition and multiplication, building the idea of that relationship. And so I said, what would be the things that your family would need to know? Because they're going to come in and that stuff will be set up, but they haven't done this with us. So what are the steps? What's the criteria here? What do we need to follow in order for the thinking task to work for us to actually come away from it with something? What do your family members need to know? Because they're going to be your partners. And so we kind of practice that. How will you explain this to them? Right. So they went through and came up with, oh, well, this is what you do, and I have the marker, and if I have the marker, you're doing the talking, and then we'll trade, right? You talk and I have the marker, or whatever it might be. And yeah, I said, you'll have to go through it with them. And that had been a routine we had been doing all year. So they were very comfortable with that. But we typed out the steps that they had come up with and hung them next to the white books, and they could choose from a couple of different photos when they came in. And it was interesting to see some parents jumped right in, like once they understood, oh, I am part, oh, okay. And they jumped right in, and it was really cool to see them interacting with their kids in that way and coming up with different ideas and coming up with a different question that to challenge their students. And I think it was neat to see some of them were like kind of taken aback. Oh, like, so I would wander away because I think sometimes the hovering is probably part of the problem, but they, would invite them, right? And it was interesting to see even some of the parroting of the things I might say. Well, I wonder what would happen if you did it this way, and
That's that.
right. But it was neat to see some students that way. And I think, there was also parents, I think, that were surprised as they watched their child go through the process and say, well, I have to have a repeated addition, and I have to have another multiplication, and then I have to be able to relate them, and these are the things that I have to do. And it was interesting to see them watching their child talk through their strategy and talk through their understanding, and then having a parent try it and see something different or approach it in a different way and come up with the same answer. And I think so it was really neat to see. And I think sometimes some parents, when they feel a little bit more like, oh boy, how are they going to learn their multiplication facts if this is what they're doing? Having them come in and participate in that and seeing and hearing the language that their kids are using as they talk through their problem solving and their strategies, and even how they handle if they started through and ended up hitting a bump there and realizing, ooh, there's something I missed, how they were able to go back around. It was really neat to see. And I look forward to doing that again, and also looking at how we introduce it with other subject areas too. Yeah, just that same approach, right? That problem solving, talking through our learning.
Raquel, anything to add on student-led conferences or sharing thinking classrooms with parents?
Karina and I had met a couple weeks ago with Ryan and Susan, and she was sharing about student-led conferences, and I'm actually really excited to test that out for next year and to see how I can incorporate that in as well.
And I think that's some of my favorite parts of when the teachers are able to come together, or the huddles.
Thank you to Raquel and Carina for sharing how routines, relationships, and reflection deepen the impact of thinking classrooms in elementary math. Here's a few parts that resonated with us. Remember to start small and build big. Raquel reminded us that the transformation begins with manageable steps. 10 to 15 minutes every day didn't seem too daunting. That small commitment to morning number talks laid the foundation for deeper learning. At the heart of building thinking classrooms is student agency. From self-assessing with ski-themed challenge levels to leading their families through thinking tasks at student-led conferences, students demonstrated remarkable independence and pride. Carina shared one student's comment, "Well, I have this idea and it's more of a blue square," showing the students' ability to assess and articulate where they are at in their learning and what they need in the moment. Collaboration is key. Raquel captured the heart of thinking classrooms when she said, they have to work together, and you are definitely there if they need support. They just start building that community, and they have to help each other out. The shift from teacher-led to peer-supported learning fosters resilience, empathy, and deeper understanding, family engagement, and connection. Thinking classrooms extend beyond school walls. Carina described how students brought math home, sparking conversations and curiosity. For families, it has been extremely exciting to hear the connection between what we're doing at school and what's happening at home. This episode explored what happens when students are given the freedom to explore, collaborate, and actively step into their learning, and how it has the potential to become more meaningful, more connected, and maybe even just a little bit more fun to learn about math. Thanks for joining us in part 2. Be sure to follow us over into part 3, where we continue the conversation and explore how thinking classrooms are shaping assessment, rippling out into other subjects, and what Carina and Raquel learned from a year of building thinking classrooms. Thanks for listening. Thank you for joining our community of innovators and changemakers. We hope the conversations and stories have ignited a spark within. We'd like to express our gratitude to our dedicated Northeast educators. Until next time, remember to subscribe to Any Voices and join us on the next episode as we share the stories of learning shaping our future. Thanks for listening.